I never imagined that the sound of a wooden gavel striking a desk could echo louder than the sound of a breaking heart. That day, in that cold courtroom, I learned it could. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that you forgot to protect yourself, then maybe my story will feel familiar. So before I begin, I just want to say, if you believe that love should never be weaponized, please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and stay till the end. Because this isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about survival. My name is Alina. And once upon a time, I believed in my husband more than I believed in God himself. I met Daniel when I was 22, young, hopeful, freshly graduated, and ready to build a life full of warmth and honesty. He was a lawyer, confident, articulate, the kind of man who could make anyone feel seen just by the way he looked at them. He made me feel safe, something I had never truly felt before. We married 2 years later. Our life together wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. We built dreams like small, fragile houses of glass, a son, a home, a shared laugh in the kitchen. I thought our little world was unbreakable. But glass, it always looks perfect right before it shatters. It started small. Late-night calls, unexplained absences, his cologne fading into something foreign. I told myself he was just tired from work, that I was overthinking, that love, real love, demanded patience. But patience can be the quietest form of self-destruction. One evening, I found a text message on his phone. I wasn't snooping. The phone had lit up on the counter while he was in the shower. It was from someone named Eva. The message was short, only 5 words. But they were enough to turn my world upside down. I miss your touch, Dee. My hands shook as I placed the phone back down. My reflection in the microwave door looked unfamiliar. My lips trembled, but no words came out. It wasn't anger I felt. It was emptiness. Cold, suffocating emptiness. When he came out of the shower, I smiled like I hadn't just seen my entire life crumble. I don't know why. Maybe because I still loved him. Maybe because I wanted him to deny it so badly. He didn't. He looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "It's not what you think, Alina." The oldest, most cowardly line in the book. I didn't fight that night. I just walked to our son's room, watched him sleep, and wondered how to protect him from a kind of pain I couldn't even protect myself from. Weeks turned into months. Daniel became colder, more distant. Eventually, he filed for divorce. No discussion. No explanation. Just a neatly folded letter and a printed document left on the kitchen table. The same table where we once celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. I remember sitting on the floor that night, unable to breathe, while my son, just 7 years old, came and sat beside me. He didn't say a word. He just put his tiny hand on my arm. And in that moment, I realized something. The man I had loved wasn't the same man standing against me now. The divorce was ugly. The kind of ugly that leaves scars on your soul. Daniel had money, connections, and confidence. I had truth, but truth doesn't always win in courtrooms. He fought for custody of our son, not because he wanted him, but because he wanted to hurt me. I remember walking into the courtroom for the first hearing. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wore the only formal outfit I had, black pants, a white blouse, and the same heels from our wedding rehearsal dinner. It was stupid, but part of me still believed memories could change people. When I saw Daniel sitting there, laughing with his lawyer, my stomach twisted. He looked happy, free, almost, as if I had been the burden all along. And then it began. His lawyer stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and said the words that still ring in my head every single night. "Your Honor, my client's wife is emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible. We have evidence to suggest she's unfit to raise a child in a stable environment. I froze. Every syllable felt like a knife. Daniel didn't look at me. He just sat there, his jaw set, pretending to be the victim. My vision blurred with tears. My breath caught in my chest. The same man who once held my face and called me his heart was now using that same voice to destroy my credibility as a mother. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell the world the truth, that I was the one who kept our family together, that I worked double shifts, that I stayed awake through nights of his silence and infidelity. But the courtroom doesn't care about broken hearts. It only cares about evidence. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled. I told the judge the truth, plain and raw. I said I didn't have wealth or lawyers, but I had love. I told them that my son was my world, that no document, no man, no betrayal could ever change that. As I spoke, Daniel shifted in his seat. For the first time, his eyes met mine. There was something there, maybe guilt, maybe shame, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The judge didn't decide that day. Custody hearings are slow, cruel, and exhausting. But something inside me shifted. That was the day I realized I couldn't wait for justice. I had to become it. That night, I went home and cried until I had nothing left. Then I looked at myself in the mirror. Puffy eyes, trembling lips, messy hair, and I said quietly, "You will not let him break you again." It wasn't a declaration. It was a promise. And for the first time since my marriage began to fall apart, I felt something new. A spark. A tiny, trembling spark of strength. Little did I know that spark would one day burn brighter than everything he tried to destroy. There's something strange about pain. How it doesn't really go away. It just changes its shape. Some days it's a sharp knife cutting through your chest. Other days it's just a dull ache you learn to live with. After that first hearing, I lived with the ache. I stopped expecting apologies. I stopped expecting fairness. Instead, I started waking up every morning with one thought. My son deserves a mother who refuses to break. But it wasn't easy. Money was tight. I worked at a small community library, barely making enough to cover rent. I would drop my son off at school, then spend hours shelving books, smelling dust and ink, trying not to think about the man who used to promise me forever. Daniel, meanwhile, was thriving, at least from the outside. He had his new partner, Eva, the same woman from that message. They attended school events together, dressed perfectly, smiling like they'd never done anything wrong. People looked at them like they were the perfect couple, and me, I was the bitter ex-wife. I learned quickly that the world doesn't like women who speak about their pain. It prefers them quiet, polite, and smiling. But I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. My lawyer, an older woman named Marianne, became my only anchor during those days. She told me, "You're not fighting him, Alina. You're fighting for your child." That's different. Those words changed something in me. I started documenting everything. Phone calls, missed payments, his late pickups. Every lie he told the court, I met with truth and evidence. For the first time, I began to fight back. Not with anger, but with calm, steady strength. But the most painful part wasn't the legal battle. It was watching my son get caught in the middle. He would come home quiet, distant. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he whispered, "Dad said you don't love him anymore." I froze. My heart cracked in half. How do you explain betrayal to a child? How do you tell them that the person they love most has turned love into a weapon? I just held him close and said, "No matter what anyone says, my love for you doesn't depend on anyone else's truth. It just exists, always." He didn't fully understand, but he smiled, and that was enough for me to keep going. Weeks passed. Every hearing drained me, but slowly people began to see the truth. Daniel's perfect image started to crack. His arrogance in court turned into frustration. His lawyer's tone became less confident. One day, during a cross-examination, Marianne asked him a question that silenced the room. She said, "Mr. Collins, do you believe being faithful and being a good father are related?" He shifted in his seat. She continued, "Because your son deserves a man who tells him the truth. And you haven't been that man, have you?" The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. For the first time, Daniel couldn't meet my eyes. After that day, something changed. He began showing up to hearings with less bravado. His once polished speeches became defensive. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was something. I started to rebuild my life quietly, one piece at a time. I took night classes in psychology, not because I wanted a career change, but because I wanted to understand why people destroy the ones who love them most. I started journaling again. Writing gave me a voice when my own seemed lost. And slowly, I noticed that the more I poured into myself, the less space his memory took up. But Daniel, he noticed that too. He started showing up unexpectedly, at my door, at my son's school events. Always with that same half smile that used to melt me, now only made me sick. He'd say things like, "You've changed, Alina. You seem stronger." Or, "Eva isn't like you. She doesn't argue. She doesn't fight." And I would smile politely and reply, "Then I hope she never has to." He didn't like that. He wanted the old me, the one who cried, who begged, who still believed his lies. But she was gone. One evening, after another court session, we both ended up in the parking lot at the same time. It was raining, the kind of soft rain that makes the world look like it's underwater. He approached me slowly, hands in his pockets, and said, "You really want to keep fighting this, Alina? You're not going to win." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "You already took my marriage, Daniel. You don't get to take my motherhood too." He didn't reply. He just turned away. And for the first time I saw it, the smallest flicker of guilt in his eyes. That night, I drove home, soaking wet, heart pounding, but not with sadness. With resolve, because I finally understood something. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about dignity, and dignity is something no one can steal unless you hand it over willingly. Months later, when the final custody hearing was announced, I felt ready. I didn't wear black this time. I wore pale blue, calm, steady, confident, the color of clarity. As I sat in that courtroom, watching Daniel's lawyer shuffle his papers nervously, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't the broken woman they described in the first hearing. I was a mother, a survivor, a woman who had walked through betrayal and found herself on the other side. But I had no idea that the biggest twist was yet to come. Because during that final hearing, Daniel would do something I never expected. Something that would expose the truth louder than any words I could have spoken. I still remember the morning of the final custody hearing. The air felt heavier than usual, like even the sky knew what was coming. It wasn't fear that ran through me. It was something deeper. Something quieter. It was acceptance. I had already survived the worst of it. The humiliation, the lies, the nights of crying into a pillow so my son wouldn't hear. Today wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about standing tall, even if the world refused to see me. When I arrived at the courthouse, Daniel was already there. He looked different. Not the man I once loved, not even the man who'd fought to destroy me. He looked tired, hollow, like his own choices had begun to haunt him. He avoided my eyes, but I saw how his hands fidgeted when he thought no one was watching. Eva wasn't there this time. I noticed that too. I sat quietly beside Marianne, my lawyer. She squeezed my hand once before the judge entered, a small, grounding gesture that reminded me I wasn't alone. Then Daniel's lawyer stood up. The same man who had once smiled like he'd already won the world. He began, "Your Honor, my client wishes to make a final statement." Daniel stood slowly, smoothing the front of his suit, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke. "Your Honor, I've said a lot of things in this courtroom. Some of them were not entirely fair. I was angry. I was hurt. But the truth is, Alina has been a good mother." The room fell silent. Even his lawyer looked surprised. He continued, "I've watched her these past months. She's given our son stability when I gave him confusion. She's been patient when I was prideful. And if I'm being honest, he exhaled, she's stronger than I ever was. My heart stopped. For years I'd wanted to hear him say something, anything, that sounded like remorse. But when it came, it didn't feel like triumph. It just felt sad. The judge nodded slowly, jotting something down. Marianne leaned closer to whisper, "He just handed us the case," but I barely heard her. All I could think was, after all the tears, after all the pain, it ended not with rage, but with truth. When the judge finally ruled in my favor, granting me primary custody, I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just sat there, silent, letting the weight of years slowly lift off my chest. Daniel looked at me then. Really looked at me. There was no arrogance left in his eyes. Only regret, quiet and human. He mouthed something across the courtroom. I think it was, "I'm sorry," but I didn't nod. I didn't smile, because forgiveness isn't a gift you hand to someone else. It's something you give yourself when you're ready to move forward. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. The sun was breaking through clouds, the light gentle on my face. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. My son ran up to me, his little backpack bouncing, and said, "Mom, did we win?" I knelt down, kissed his forehead, and said softly, "We didn't win, sweetheart. We just got what's right." That night, I tucked him into bed and sat beside him until he fell asleep. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy kind of quiet anymore. It was peace. Simple, ordinary peace. Later, I went through an old box in my closet. Inside were photographs. Daniel and me on our wedding day, our honeymoon, his first Father's Day. For a moment, I almost put them away again. But instead, I took one photo out, one where he was smiling at our baby, and whispered, "You could have been good, you know." Then I burned it. Not out of hate, but as a way of saying goodbye to everything that once held me hostage. In the weeks that followed, Daniel tried to reach out, texts, calls, showing up at our son's school. He wasn't cruel anymore. He was quiet, careful, like a man who finally realized what he'd destroyed. He once left a small note in my mailbox that said, "You were always the strong one." I just wish I'd seen it before it was too late. I never replied, because some stories don't need closure from both sides. Instead, I focused on building a new one. I poured my heart into work, started teaching part-time at the community college. I turned my journaling into articles, stories about resilience, healing, and what it truly means to rise after being broken. One of them went viral. A woman from across the country wrote to me, saying my story gave her courage to leave an abusive relationship, and that was the moment I realized something profound. My pain had purpose. It wasn't just tragedy, it was transformation. Years later, when I watched my son graduate high school, Daniel stood in the back of the crowd. He looked older, quieter. When our eyes met, he smiled faintly, a sad, humble smile. I nodded once, just enough to say, "I forgive you," not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. That night, as I stood on my balcony, watching the sunset, I whispered to the wind, not as a plea, but as a declaration. "You took everything you could, Daniel, but you didn't take me." And with that, the ache inside me finally faded into something softer. Not pain. Not anger, just gratitude for the woman I became because of it all.